Welcome to the debate. Imagine stepping into a room where your entire personality, your decades of career experience, and, well, your sharp intellect are just suddenly erased.
Yeah, completely wiped clean.
Right. You cannot explain your background, you can't articulate your humor, and the only tool you're given to rebuild yourself from scratch is a rudimentary grammar chart.
Which is exactly the reality of the A1 language learner. I mean, you are stripped down to absolute zero.
And that really brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are looking closely at Unit 1, Lesson 2 of a standard foundational A1 curriculum. It's the ground floor of language acquisition, and the explicit focus of this lesson is identifying individuals and occupations.
Right, it's the lesson where you basically learn to say who you are and who the people around you are.
Exactly. But beneath that really simple premise lies this fascinating pedagogical tension. When we're building these very first building blocks of a new language, does this source material prioritize structural, grammatical precision as its primary engine, or is it fundamentally driven by social utility and identity formation?
It's a great question.
I will be arguing that the material is at its core an exercise in structural precision. I mean, it treats early language like a rigid mathematical framework. You basically have to master the algebra of the rules before any genuine human expression can happen.
And I completely disagree. I contend that the material is driven almost entirely by social utility. The grammar is there, obviously, but it acts merely as a vehicle to fulfill an immediate, urgent human need, which is the need to categorize others and declare your own social identity.
Well, let's look at the actual architecture of this lesson. It is an elegant, highly strict structural formula. Before it asks a student to genuinely express a real thought, it maps out a rigid grid. It explicitly focuses on singular versus plural transformations. Like, it teaches the learner that the singular noun, a chef, mathematically transforms into the plural, two chefs. Or, an athlete becomes three athletes.
Right, it does map out those plurals immediately, yes.
And it goes further than that. It maps subject pronouns to precise, non-negotiable forms of the verb to be. I, we, you, he, she, they.
The basic building blocks.
Exactly. But these aren't just vocabulary words, they are load-bearing structural pillars. The material prioritizes exactness. It forces the learner to drill the affirmative, the negative, and the contracted states side by side.
Sure, like the charts.
Yeah, the charts. We are photographers. We are photographers. We are not chefs. We aren't chefs. This is not free expression. This is code. It's the mathematical rules of language being laid down as a strict prerequisite to speech.
I hear you, but look at how that exact same page is framed visually and conceptually. At the very top in bold, unmistakable text is the banner, Goal. Identify your classmates.
Okay, yes.
That is a deeply sociological objective. It isn't goal, conjugate the verb to be. And look at the vocabulary list the text provides right underneath that banner. We see images and labels for a chef, a writer, a manager, a scientist, a doctor, an engineer.
Right.
This proves the lesson is truly about giving adult learners the tools to navigate social spaces and assert professional identities.
See, you look at those words and you see identity markers. I see them as plug-and-play variables.
They are so much more than variables. When we focus entirely on the A1 level, we have to deeply consider the psychology of the adult learner. Think about a 50-year-old corporate manager sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair in an evening class.
Right. It's intimidating.
Highly intimidating. In their native language, they are articulate, powerful, and nuanced. In this classroom, they feel incredibly vulnerable. I mean, they are functionally reduced to the communication level of a toddler.
Sure.
So providing them with high-status identity markers immediately preserves their ego and gives them social agency. The connection and the social context are what drive the learning here, not the grammatical mechanics.
Okay, you argue that giving them the word manager or engineer preserves their ego and grants them social agency, but how much agency do they really have when the textbook treats those very words as interchangeable cogs in a grammar machine? Like, look closely at exercise 3 and exercise 4.
You mean the fill-in-the-blank exercises?
Exactly. The student is asked to complete partial statements. I blank a writer or she blank not a pilot. Then they have to choose the correct noun form. I am blank an artist, artists, or artist.
Yeah.
The textbook doesn't care in the slightest if the student personally relates to being an architect or a pilot. Identity is completely irrelevant to the success of the exercise.
Well, no. The exercise is testing comprehension.
It is testing syntax. It only cares that if the student uses the pronoun they, the noun writer must have an S added to the end to become writers. The textbook is treating these diverse occupations primarily as variables to test noun agreement. The vocabulary is entirely subordinate to the structural formula.
I have to push back on that. If the goal were purely structural, if it were truly just about cold noun-verb agreement like an algebra equation, the textbook authors could have used any nouns in the world.
No, really, they could have used apples and oranges or chairs and tables. It is a table. They are tables. The grammatical mechanism is exactly the same.
But using human occupations allows them to practice human pronouns. He is a manager rather than it is a table.
Okay, but they could have just used generic identifiers then. I am a man, she is a person. But they actively chose highly specific, real-world professional identities. You turn the page and there is a photo of a flight attendant in a uniform, a pilot in the cockpit, a banker, a musician.
Right.
They are handing this nervous, vulnerable adult learner a lifeline. Equipping them with the word banker isn't just about making sure they drop the article a when they switch to the plural, bankers. It's about validating their real-world existence. Language is essentially a social contract.
A contract built on rules.
A contract built on mutual recognition. If I walk into a room of strangers and all I can say is, I am a person, I have established zero place in the social hierarchy. I'm invisible.
That's a fair point.
Right? If I can say I am an engineer, I have immediately commanded a specific type of respect. The grammar you are focusing on is just the envelope. The vocabulary, the identity, is the letter inside.
Okay, but if the primary goal is validating identity and establishing this social contract, why is the text so obsessively punitive about how that identity is communicated? The textbook acts like a strict referee the second the learner opens their mouth. Look at the Be Careful section right in the middle of the grammar page.
Ah, the red warning box about short answers.
Yes, the red box. It is utterly fascinating because it functions exactly like a syntax error in computer coding. The text explicitly dictates that in short answers, yes, I am is correct. But yes, I am is fundamentally forbidden.
Well,
It literally screams off the page, yes, I am, not yes, I'm. It forbids yes, she's and yes, were.
It is pointing out an exception to the contraction rule.
But think about the implication of that exception. If the goal is just social utility, if it's just about ego preservation and getting your identity across so we can connect, then yes, I'm works perfectly well.
Does it, though?
Yes! If someone asks, are you the manager? And you say, yes, I'm, a native speaker would know exactly what you meant. You have asserted your identity. You have achieved the social goal. But the text throws a red flag. It says, no, you have violated the structural integrity of the code. This proves the material value's rigid adherence to structural rules over simply communicating a human message.
Look, the Be Careful box is visually strict, I'll grant you that. It looks like a warning label on heavy machinery, but you have to look at the mechanics of why that rule exists, which reveals itself in the actual application of these exercises.
Okay, explain the mechanics then.
The strictness regarding contractions isn't there just to torture the learner with arbitrary mathematical laws. It's taught so the learner doesn't alienate themselves when speaking to native English speakers.
How does saying, yes, I'm, alienate anyone? The meaning is entirely intact.
Because of the rhythm of the language. Native English speakers do not end a sentence with a contracted pronoun and what linguists call a copular verb.
A linking verb?
Exactly, a linking verb like is or am that connects the subject to its identity.
Right, we don't end on she's or their.
We don't, because English is a stress-timed language. We rely on the heavy rhythmic beats of certain words to parse meaning. When you contract she is to she's at the very end of a sentence, you swallow the beat.
It literally grates on the ear of a native speaker. It causes a tiny moment of cognitive dissonance.
the listener unconsciously flinches. By fiercely forbidding that specific instruction, the text is actually protecting the learner from social friction.
Protecting them from a flinch?
Yes. It is ensuring that when they step out of that classroom and into a coffee shop, their conversational flow doesn't trigger that subconscious flinch in the person they are talking to. The structural rule entirely serves the social interaction.
See, that assumes the learner is ready for or even capable of natural conversational flow at this stage. And if we look at the mechanics of what is happening in the learner's brain, they are nowhere near a natural flow.
I disagree.
To get to that smooth interaction you're describing, the learner is being forced to do complex on-the-fly morphology. I mean, they are rapidly changing the form of words in their head to fit the grammatical rules.
Well, it happens quickly, but yes.
Let's break down the mental gymnastics required in exercise 6. The prompt asks a question. Is Tim an actor? The student must provide the negative short answer and then correct the information. No, he's not. He's Michael.
A very common social correction.
But a massively complex structural calculation. To successfully complete that seemingly simple exchange, the learner must first identify the subject, Tim. They must then convert the proper noun Tim into the singular masculine pronoun he.
Right.
Next, they must select the correct form of the verb to be for that specific pronoun. Then, they have to apply the negative state. Then, they have to navigate the exact contraction rules we just talked about to produce he's not instead of the equally valid he isn't, or mistakenly outputting the forbidden he is not, depending on how they process the prompt.
It happens in a fraction of a second.
For us, yes. But for an A1 learner, that is an enormous amount of structural processing. To call that a natural social flow ignores the intense, rigid scaffolding required to produce a sentence. The learner is holding 5 different mathematical variables in their head just to correct a name. It's a calculation, not a conversation.
But the calculation isn't the end goal. The calculation is the rehearsal for the performance, and the text proves this unequivocally in its final section, the conversation model.
Oh, the conversation model.
Yes, this is where the entire lesson culminates. We move away from the isolated morphology drills and into a fully realized social interaction.
Fully realized is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Look at the dialogue. Excuse me, are you Marie? No, I'm not. I'm Laura. That's Marie. Where? Right over there. Thank you. You're welcome. Notice what is happening in the instructions here.
They're filling in the blanks.
No, the prompt and the conversation activator explicitly ask students to personalize the conversation and use real names. They are instructed to identify other classmates. They are taking the grammar they just meticulously calculated and immediately deploying it to navigate physical real-world space.
Okay.
Pointing across a room and saying, right over there, that is spatial navigation. That is social reality. It proves the entire architecture of the lesson was designed to bring the nervous adult student out of their own head and into a moment of genuine human connection.
I look at that exact same conversation model and see a highly artificial, heavily scripted grammar exercise dressed up as free expression.
Really?
Yes. Look at the instructions right above your activator. Step 2, rhythm and intonation. Listen again and repeat. The material is not asking the students to genuinely express themselves. It is asking them to mimic a prefabricated audio track.
Right, to learn the sound.
It's demanding that they match the prosody, the exact musical rhythm, the pitch, the rise and fall of the voice of a recording.
Because prosody carries social meaning.
But it's mimicry. And when they finally practice with their classmates, they're simply plugging their real names into the exact same rigid variables we discussed earlier. Excuse me, are you variable A? No, I'm not. I'm variable B.
That's a bit cynical.
It is a spoken Mad Libs exercise. It creates the illusion of a social interaction, but the parameters are so tightly controlled that any real deviation is impossible. If the student genuinely tried to have a free-flowing social interaction here, like if they said, "No, I'm Laura. I don't know where Marie is," the exercise would completely collapse because they don't have the structural tools to deviate from the script. It is a drill heavily disguised as a chat.
You are completely dismissing the profound psychological leap that happens when a student uses their own actual name in a new language for the first time. Yes, it's a script, but think about your own life. All everyday social interactions are scripts.
Well, to a degree.
To a massive degree. When you go to a coffee shop and order a drink, you are running a script. Hi, how are you? I'll have a medium coffee. Thank you. You aren't inventing new grammatical structures. You are executing a social routine.
That's true.
At the A1 level, we are simply handing learners the most essential survival scripts they need to exist in public.
But they are reading it off a page.
For now. But when the adult student turns to the person next to them and says, "Are you Marie?" and the other person responds, "No, I'm Laura," they have successfully mapped the social hierarchy and the geography of the room using a foreign code. Respect. Hitting the right pitch on "excuse me" signals to the other person, "I am trying to connect with you without being aggressive." It is purely sociological.
I appreciate the idea that everyday social interactions are essentially survival scripts. That is a strong way to contextualize it. But I constantly return to the text's relentless focus on the mechanics of the engine.
Okay.
Because if the ultimate goal was simply mapping social geography and preserving the learner's ego, the lesson wouldn't dedicate 80% of its page space to explicit grammar charts, singular and plural noun transformations, and punitive negative contraction exceptions.
Well, it takes time to explain the tools.
But the tools are the focus. The conversation model is a tiny fraction of the material at the very end. The bulk of the lesson is spent examining the engine under the hood, not driving the car down the street.
I see what you're saying.
The text forces the student to recognize that the verb to be acts identically to an equal sign in a mathematical equation. Subject equals noun. We equals photographers. A plural subject fundamentally demands a plural noun. If the left side of the equation is multiplied by 2, the right side must be multiplied by 2.
Right.
That is the true pedagogical philosophy at work here. The social context, the pictures of the pilots and the flight attendants, is just the flavoring to make the mathematical medicine go down.
And without that flavoring, the engine never starts at all. The grammar charts you see as the rigid core of the lesson are entirely meaningless without the baseline human desire to identify yourself and be recognized by others.
Okay.
The text knows this. That's why it doesn't wait until Lesson 10 to introduce complex professional occupations. It does it in Lesson 2. It says to that adult learner sitting in the plastic chair, "We know you need to tell people who you are or you will feel invisible. Here are the exact tools to do it."
Tools that are strictly regulated.
But the strictness of the grammar isn't there to restrict them like a cage. It's there to give them a safety net. When you know exactly how the structural equation works, you can step into a vulnerable social situation without the terrifying fear of humiliating yourself. The mathematical rules enable the social courage.
This is a fascinating divergence in how we interpret the very bedrock of language acquisition. We are looking at the exact same charts and dialogues and seeing entirely different underlying philosophies. I mean, I have argued throughout this discussion that this A1 source material is fundamentally rooted in the mastery of structural frameworks.
Right.
The explicit focus on singular and plural noun transformations, the exact mapping of pronouns to the verb to be, and the uncompromising strictness of the contraction rules, like forbidding "yes, I'm" to preserve the syntactic structure. All of that demonstrates an approach that treats early language learning as a rigid mathematical system. The occupations and the scripted dialogues are simply variables used to test that structural integrity.
And my position remains that the lesson is ultimately driven by human connection and the preservation of the adult learner's ego. From the explicit, overarching goal of identify your classmates to the carefully curated vocabulary of high-status professional identities, the material is designed to give learners immediate social agency. Even though strict grammatical rules exist, not for the sake of cold algebra, but to protect the learner from social friction, ensuring they understand the stress timing and prosody needed to navigate real-world interactions smoothly and naturally.
Yet, despite viewing this through completely different lenses, I think we both find ourselves agreeing on the intense reality of the learner's experience. At this initial A1 stage, learners are being handed a highly curated, highly specific set of tools.
Absolutely. Whether you view those tools as rigid algebraic formulas or as necessary social survival scripts, they are non-negotiable.
You cannot survive in a new linguistic environment without them. They are the essential keys to unlocking everything that comes next.
It is a vital reminder of how incredibly complex the simple act of saying I am really is. Looking at early language materials through both a mechanical and a sociological lens reveals just how much invisible work is happening in a beginner's mind.
Definitely.
There is so much more to explore in the nuances of how we first learn to speak to one another, and we invite you to draw your own conclusions on what truly drives those early words. Because ultimately, whether you are trying to write flawless code where every single keystroke matters, or you are extending a nervous handshake in a room full of strangers trying to assert your own identity, well, the foundation has to be built before the connection can